The Earth is currently experiencing human-influenced environmental crises. Climate change is an ever-increasing threat to our way of life and agricultural production. In addition to rising average temperatures, climate change is expected to increase the risk of bushfire, drought, extreme weather events, and rising sea levels. Species are being lost at 100 to 1,000 times what is believed to be the natural background rate of extinction, which scientists believe may have profound consequences for the future of human civilization. And yet native vegetation is continually being cleared for more intensive agriculture. In Victoria, we have just 20% of native vegetation left on private land. This depressing statistic is reflective of our cultural heritage. The 2016 Climate Change Report forecasts Australia's agricultural sector is showing signs of decreasing capacity and faltering productivity gains. The resilience of some rural industries is under threat. This is certainly evident in the north-central bioregion today, with big issues from large-scale farming including erosion, declining soil health, salinity, weeds, and the acceleration of climate change through deforestation. Bendigo is on the forefront of desertification. To the north, as you can see, this aerial perspective clearly shows the contrast between the agricultural land and native forests. It's quite stark. The current paradigm for land use is myopic and binary, with biodiversity on one side of the fence and production on the other. So how do we maintain our agricultural systems and conservation of biodiversity whilst the current land use paradigm is perpetually exacerbating the situation? Agroforestry is a food system driven by the productive use of trees and woody shrubs on farms. Agroforestry is about allowing farmers to diversify their income while addressing landscape dysfunction issues and accommodating biodiversity. Farmers may wish to grow conventional plantations for wood, grow oil mallees for salinity control, palatable shade trees for stock, or consolidate erosion issues and soil conservation. All these different methods are designed to make conditions more favourable for the growth of plants and animals and play a key role in keeping farm ecosystems healthy. So how can agroforestry help in the north-central bioregion? Kerrang lies on the edge of the Loddon River, just 25 kilometres inland from the Murray Riverina. As you can see, again, the lack of ground cover is confronting from an aerial perspective. Kerrang is classic irrigation country, hot, dry, saline soils with little rainfall. Agricultural activity ranges from cotton, lucerne, grain and vegetables. Due to the excessive irrigation that goes against the natural regime of flooding, the water table is now abnormally high, and in some cases hypersaline water is discharging at the surface. Some paddocks are so sodic that they can no longer be productive. How did it get this way? Farmers have known about the effects of irrigation and salinity for a long time now. It's not like they didn't see this coming. The intensity at which the overuse and abuse of water resources of overstocking land by all can be best described as Harden's tragedy of the commons. The tragedy of the commons can be best characterised when a resource is collectively owned by a group of people. Each will exploit the resource, overusing it and thus destroying the resource. Everyone acts as an independent, ignoring the group's collective interests in favour of their own. This is capitalism at its finest. Today, this is still true and evident in the riverina landscape. Unfortunately, this kind of land is not unique to Kerrang, and the same mistakes have been replicated all across Australia, all under the false assumptions of exponential land use productivity. In 2002, about 20,000 farms and 2 million hectares of agricultural land showed actual signs of salinity. For many farms, salinity has meant loss of productivity and income. Predictions indicate that unless effective solutions are implemented, the area affected could increase to 17 million hectares by 2050, most of which is agricultural land. Taking you back to Kerrang, this irrigation bay has been adversely affected from groundwater salinity. There is very little growing with minimal ground cover. With no vegetation, there is nothing to keep the soil from eroding away. There are some plants, notably weeds, that are adaptable to survive in such conditions. So how could an agroforestry system mitigate these issues? Given the extreme nature of this land, the farmer would need to make some significant changes in land use. The land doesn't have to be excluded and rendered useless. Just some innovative changes are needed in order to reclaim the land. Saltbush is a native chenopod that is highly adapted to saline soils in the Kerrang region. Saltbush works remarkably well at lowering the water table. The plant is also resourceful at extracting salt from the soil by exuding out of its leaves. It's also great at stabilising soil with a broad covered canopy. Once the saltbush has established, you can then bring sheep on, as it is highly palatable and good for wool growth. It is great at regenerating and will last 25 years under a well-maintained grazing regime. To digress momentarily, another means to diversify and strengthen the reclaimed land would be to integrate a timber or firewood design. A key driver of the loss of biodiversity in the world is from extractive timber or firewood harvesting from native vegetation. In regards to timber especially, it is worth considering the international market and the products imported from Southeast Asia such as teak and merbau, where it has been proven to be sourced from unsustainable practices. Agroforestry systems support high levels of biodiversity when under a woodlot design. A West Australian wheatbelt landcare group did a bird survey on agro woodlots and found that eucalyptus woodlots had the same bird species richness as ecological plantings and native vegetation remnants. But woodlots possess more generalist species while the ecological plantings contain more shrub-related bird species. Cultivating timber or firewood on private land is an ethical alternative to mainstream markets, but is also a sustainable asset for renewable energy. It is important to mention, for the sake of legitimacy, that burning biomass for energy was included in the Australian Renewable Energy Target in June last year. Acacia pendula is a native wattle species endemic to the Kerrang region. Its benefits include a strong salt flood tolerance, resistant to frosts and scorching winds, and it also makes a great firewood crop. Its timber is highly desired for cabinet making. Acacia pendula is a native species that integrates well into the Kerrang agroforestry system and is compatible growing along saltbush. Its leaves are palatable to stock and can give sufficient shade. Shelter belts are an integral player in agroforestry design. Protecting crops and pastures from drying winds, they also protect stock from cold or hot winds and can address any erosion or salinity problems. The value of shelter belts in raising agricultural productivity has been demonstrated in many countries, suggesting potential improvement in crop yields of 25% and 10 to 20% in dairy production. Trees are a long-term investment. Because of their long-term nature, they can be used for many purposes, including financial risk management, retirement planning, and transferring wealth between generations. Providing intergenerational wealth, but also environmental security to future generations, has been pointed out by the United Nations as key principles necessary for a sustainable future. But just because trees are a long-term investment doesn't mean you can't benefit in the short term. Farmers may be reluctant to grow trees because of the time they have to wait to harvest. Given the economic benefits in the short term, i.e. shade, fodder and land conservation, the tree's value can hardly be disputed. It just has to be demonstrated. But for more entrepreneurial farmers, ventures such as seed production create an opportunity for short-term returns. The aforementioned Acacia pendula is one of these edible wattle seed plants. Wattle seed contains potassium, calcium, iron and zinc in fairly high concentrations. With a low glycemic index, they are good for diabetics, providing a steady stream of sugars that do not produce sudden rises in blood glucose levels. Wattle seed has the potential to feed the world. Thinnings from woodlots can also be used to inoculate shiitake mushrooms, a boutique food in Australia that is predominantly sourced from overseas. Shiitake mushrooms are an effective link between urban and rural communities. So there are a diversity of positive land use options and products that are compatible under an agroforestry system. The problem of conserving biodiversity goes hand in hand with larger issues of social and economic development. Land use must be both ecologically and economically sustainable. Agroforestry systems, in contrast to intensive monocultures, may provide quality habitats that are important for biodiversity conservation. Owning agriculture land is a privilege. Agroforestry helps us look at farmland and bestow a sense of dignity and ethic by utilising the most from a space whilst retaining its ecological integrity. Farmland is more than just a paddock and monoculture grain. It is a living, breathing system intertwined with ecosystem services that are integral for the survival of the human race. It is expected that the world population will increase to 9 billion in the next 40 years, and the population of Australia to 35 million by 2050. With an ever-increasing population coupled with the threats of climate change, accessibility and availability to nutritional food is crying out for an agricultural renaissance. Agroforestry is one food system that is capable of rising to the occasion.